All right, you are good to go.
Thank you, Madeline. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Annapolis Board of Appeals special virtual meeting for May 17th, 2023. This meeting is being broadcast on the City of Annapolis YouTube channel. My name is Bob Gallagher, Chair of the Board. This virtual format allows the public to observe the meeting through the video link, to submit comments through the City of Annapolis website. Links to the YouTube channel, the comment form on the City of Annapolis website, and to database for information about the cases you'll be hearing tonight. All those links may be found on the agenda for tonight's meeting. So the people that you see on the screen are the members of the Board of Appeals. When a case is called, representatives of the parties to the case will also appear on the screen. Also participating in the meeting are our recording secretary, Kim Consoli, our broadcast technician tonight, Madeline. Also participating may be members or representatives of the City Attorney's Office, Board Counsel, Celine Demir, Jacqueline Rouse, liaison to the board from the Department of Planning and Zoning, and possibly other members of the staff at the Planning and Zoning Department. Any public comments received by noon today and cases before the board this evening have been provided to the board and the parties and will be made part of the record. We ask everyone but the members of the board to mute their audio. If anyone else wishes to speak during the meeting, please raise your hand and I'll call on you to speak. Let me remind everyone that communications with the board about any case by anyone other than a party to a case must go through the comment form. Communications by parties with the board must go through board liaison, Ms. Rouse. No one should contact any member of the board directly about any case before the board. So we'll ask Ms. Consoli to call the roll.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Hector,
Here.
Dr. Chen,
Present.
Mr. Walsh,
Present.
Mr. Zazali does not appear to be. Mr. Chairman, we have 4 members present at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Zazali may join us. And if you would keep your eye on that, make a note in the record of when he joins us. And if I don't notice it, please bring that to my attention. So we have a quorum. Have the members of the board had a chance to review the agenda for tonight's meeting? Are there any corrections or comments?
Yes.
I've seen it, yes.
If there are no corrections or comments, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. The next item will be approval of the minutes for May 2nd, 2023. Are there any corrections or additions there? If not, happy to entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move this minutes Board of Appeals meeting of May 2nd be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hector. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. Now we can get on to the real business of the evening. The first case will be special exception 2023-002. The special exception application by Sandra Rosswork, the owner, to establish an accessory dwelling unit on property located at 511 Chesapeake Street. This is the first time we've had exemption application come before us for an accessory dwelling unit. The law was amended not too long ago to give us the authority to do that. We apply the same criteria that we apply to any other special exception. So who would like to introduce this case for the city? Anyone? Do we have Ms. Burke or Ms. Rouse?
To do that. I'm now going to refer to myself in the third person.
Whatever, Jackie.
So this is our first application for an accessory dwelling unit. The city did amend the code to allow accessory dwelling units in all residential districts of the city, but in the conservation districts, which includes, for example, the R2NC, which is the Conservation District for Eastport. They do require special exception approval. We've had a number of conversations with a number of people who have indicated interest in applying for an accessory dwelling unit. But in many cases, the applicants come to the conclusion that the requirements for doing one, where they're constructing a new structure or have to extend water and sewer lines to a building or many other things, are so difficult and so onerous that they have elected not to do it. So we're very pleased that we finally have an application from Ms. Rosswork she has an existing small garage that she built in 2016, and that is actually on the first floor, actually already has on everything but, a kitchen stove layout for an accessory dwelling unit. So she did apply for this. It's only 360 square feet in size. Ms. Rosswork is here representing herself tonight. We did postpone this application from the last meeting and re-advertise it because there was a hiccup in the notification requirements, but everyone has been properly notified for the hearing tonight. We re-advertised, reposted, and re-notified in order to comply with the code requirements. And Ms. Rosswork is here to present on her behalf.
I know we have one positive comment from a member of the public.
Yes, and let me clarify that I did speak with that homeowner today, and that is actually an immediately adjacent neighbor who wanted to make sure that we had gotten the comment and that we, that you all had gotten her comment, that she was fully supportive of the application.
Good. All right, Ms. Rosswork, is there something you'd like us to know that's not contained in your application or the staff report?
I think most of what I would like to say has been already been in the application. The bottom line is that this is a very small apartment in a garage. The garage has been in the same space and on the same site for about 100 years. In 2017, I completely rebuilt the garage and at that time added a small studio apartment in the back part of the garage. When the garage was rebuilt, all the utilities were added, so it has already sewage, electricity, water, and so forth. The apartment was designed to only hold one person, so it's quite small, 360 square feet. There is an existing driveway. So the bottom line is there's no construction of any sort required. There's no driveway needed, nothing. And as far as the cooking equipment, I don't have a built-in stove, but I do have a microwave. I have a cooktop. And I have a toaster oven, so I don't think there's any lack of cooking. There's a built-in refrigerator and a sink, of course, so it's basically a kitchenette.
Okay. Is it in the plans to put this in the short-term rental market?
No, my plan would be to have it be an annual rental for one person.
Okay. All right, so we will ask Ms. Consoli to admit into the record the application staff report with exhibits.
And one additional thing, Bob, that with the accessory dwelling units, the property owner is required to be a resident of either the principal structure on the property or the accessory dwelling unit. And I believe Ms. Rosswork intends to continue to occupy the main house there, and the rental would be the ADU, but that is a requirement.
Okay, interesting. And I'll ask the other board members if they have any questions as well. So what happens if she moves out?
I think the license expires when I move out. My understanding of city rental licenses is that the license becomes invalid.
Okay.
Right, rental licenses are renewed annually. So when she got her rental license, for the renewal, she would have two options. She could say that she's moved out and not renew her license. That would be problematic. Or she could lie and say that she still lives there. And I mean, but I'm being facetious at this point. I mean, we don't, beyond what we can do, we do what we can do in terms of enforcing the regulations. And as we've had many conversations with the board about this, enforcement is very difficult in the city, but we do the best we can.
And so that condition that the owner has to live in one unit or the other, that is, that condition is one that is considered when the applicant applies for the rental license.
Right, there is also a check made on that. Oh, no, well, because we've already looked at SDAT. On SDAT, if you're not living in a house and you have a different mailing address that that your bills are going to, and there's also a box in SDAT where you say you're owner, it's owner occupied or not, you would have to, that we check all of that, and that gets checked with certain types of rental licenses also. So there are some safety valves there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't our responsibility.
No, because that's a
members-
requirement regardless of whether you need special exception approval or not. And it's really a requirement that has to be checked with the licensing.
All right, members of the board, any questions for Ms. Rossworth?
I have no questions.
Yeah.
Dr. Chen?
I had a couple of clarifying questions for Jackie. This is purely, Jackie, for my education,
Yes.
since this is our first ADU. In the compliance with special exception standards in B, I was wondering if you could elaborate on the explanation in the staff report, just so that I understand what the standard was that was applied. This is the one will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property. And modifications to, it talks about modifications are only internal and minimal, and that the design plan was approved in 2016. So is that the only criteria that planning and zoning are applying to this special exception requirement?
Well, this is our first special exception for an ADU. And, we looked in this case, for example, at the fact that she had built this accessory structure in 2017. And that involved demolishing the original garage and building a new garage on the same footprint. And we looked at the floor plans that were approved with that, which did include, because you can in an accessory structure do, living space. It just can't be a full apartment, and you can't get a license for an apartment. So we looked at that also. And then we looked at how, that there have never been any complaints from any adjacent property owners about the use of that. I think we all, and so that would be a key factor if you have an existing situation like that. I thought this one was relatively simple to evaluate because of the fact that that we weren't getting any negative comments. I mean, we notified everyone within. The property was posted, everybody who lived and both lived and owned property within 200 feet was notified. And, had we gotten comment, responses from people saying that, there were other issues, blah, 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 or whatever those could be, I think that would have given us pause in this context. But, I think, and it's very small in size. I mean, this is truly, if you look at the size of this, 364 square feet, it's truly a very limited size and scope. And I don't know what else we could possibly look at in terms of impacts on surrounding properties other than those things. I mean, it's not an easy use to evaluate for special exception, especially, it's hard it would be hard to make a determination that an ADU didn't comply with the special exception standards, considering, how, and considering the fact that many, many, many people, not just throughout the city, but especially in Eastport, already have these accessory structures where they have non-apartment living space in them, and that's been allowed for a zillion years at this point. It's been, that they could do that. So then to come back and say, well, they're only supposed to be using those for, additional space for the family that lives in the main house. They're not supposed to be rented out but they can also get a short-term rental license for that space they have in their garage, so then it just gets even more difficult to separate all of that. So that's what I would say about this. And the decision was also made in this case by our chief of permitting, that because she had extended water and sewer to the structure in 2017, that she did not need to provide separate water and sewer lines to there and a separate meter, nor did she need, so she did not need to pay all of those capital facility charges that can add up to, I think, something like $25,000 for those. She had sprinklered the building when she rebuilt it in 2017, so she didn't have that requirement. She's not expanding the bulk,
Anything else, Dr. Chen?
Yes, one other question. So the parking requirement for an ADU plus a residence,
The city
you're
council.
fine with the,
Right, the city council made the decision not to require additional parking for ADUs any place in the city.
oh,
We
so
know
that was withdrawn?
Well, she can provide parking if she wants, but.
Right, but it's not a requirement.
Not a requirement.
Okay,
The Civic Association, had hoped that we would require it through the special exception process. And I think that's a conversation I had with them. And I said, we really can't require something for a use that the city council has determined through the legislative process not to require. That would seem that we would be operating at real cross purposes with them.
great. Thank you, Jackie. No more questions.
Okay.
All right. So are we ready to deliberate on this?
Yes.
Okay. Who would like to start? Dr. Chen, would you like to start?
Well, I think this is a very straightforward application. Even though it's our first, I believe it's an easy one. I was pleased to see the comment from the neighbor, the positive comment. I found that to be very helpful. I would be in favor of this application.
Mr. Hector?
I agree with Ms. Chen. As long as she hasn't gotten any negative comments from any neighbor about what she has done. She's lived there for a long while. She's done her due diligence to submit all her paperwork and get all her permits. I'm in favor too.
Mr. Walsh?
Agreed, I concur with the previous two comments.
All right. I do as well. I think that the staff report and what we've heard tonight makes clear that Ms. Rossworth has satisfied the criteria for special exception. And it's well supported in the record and no contradictory evidence at all. So I'd be in favor too. So is there a motion to approve? The
Christian is with us, Bob.
Christian, thank you for joining us, Christian. Why don't we take our vote on this without Christian, since he didn't hear the debate on this one? And
No, he's been here.
He was there.
oh,
He was there.
Okay. All right. Well, terrific. Christian, do you have anything to add or any questions?
You're on mute, Christian.
Yeah, this is a testament to perseverance and fortitude to accomplish all those, extend the sprinkler line and the sewer line, and really, so going forward, if anybody tries to sneak an accessory dwelling application in without meeting all the requirements, we have an example. We know it can be done. So this is one to celebrate as correct and proper in all respects.
Good template.
All
Yeah.
right, so is there a motion?
I motion that we accept, we move forward.
Or a second?
Approve.
Mr. Chairman, I second, and would, I second the motion and just would want to ensure that the motion includes the recommendations from staff, the 7 conditions that the staff has included in its report.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I,
All right, aye, so that's unanimous. Ms. Russworth, thank you very much for your pioneering efforts. And we wish you well.
Thank you very much. It's been quite a process.
Yes.
Beth.
So, Ms. Rossberg, you should be aware that the board will, that their board council will draft an opinion on this. And then they will adopt that opinion and we will send you a copy of it. And at that point, I mean, you can go ahead and apply for any permits, including your rental license, but we won't be able to actually approve those until we have the signed opinion.
Okay, that's
We'll
fine.
do-
Thank you very much. And thanks
we'll
for
do
your
that.
assistance.
As quickly as we can. All right, Madeline, if you'd like to excuse Ms. Rossworth and bring in the parties to the next case, variance 2301.
And to my colleagues who, just before you go on the record, if you think it's not winter still, you can look out there and see what it looks like. At
Where
10,000.
are you?
Yeah, where are you?
Is that in Wardour?
Colorado?
That's what 10,000 feet of elevation looks like.
Wow. Wow.
Are you
That's
in
probably-
Colorado, Christian?
Pretty
Good
nice
for you,
place.
Christian.
It's all fake
Good for you.
snow. It's fake snow that he put in so he could do that.
That's the remnants of a 720-inch winter.
Wow.
He had to ski into town from his yurt in order to get on this call. Okay, let's call up variance 2023-001.
Oh, I have a note saying that it was postponed at the request of the applicant, so I don't have any names for that, if that's wrong.
Right. We sent out a second revised agenda today. I think you, Bob, you and I talked about this. We had a notice from the applicant at the last minute that they've decided to postpone.
Today, this
Yes,
case is being postponed?
yes, we don't know when it's postponed to. They were going to let us know if they want to be rescheduled, and we have told them that the earliest opportunity would be July or August.
Well, that's good news.
Mhm.
It's news.
So.
All right, well, Christian, I think you must have been responsible for that. That was on the agenda till you showed up.
There
Well,
was
thank you.
another revised agenda that we sent out today or yesterday. I can't remember.
I can't keep up with them all.
I know.
All right, so we move on to the main feature for tonight. The resumption in special exception 2022-007, special exception application by FWCI Annapolis 2 LLC, property owner, and the Ogle Hall Alumni Organization, Inc., to establish and operate a 20-room inn and a social organization on the properties located at 247 King George Street and 49 College Avenue. So Mr. Hector and Mr. Zazali were not among us when we heard the first installment of this case on May 2nd, but it's my understanding that each of them has reviewed the video and materials and feels like they are prepared to fully participate in the case. Is that right, Mr. Hector
Yes, sir.
and Mr. Zazali?
Yep, correct.
Great. So I find that they have done what they need to do and they're prepared to participate, and we welcome them to our deliberations this evening. So we're resuming the hearing that began on May 2nd. The board recessed the hearing on May 2nd in order to give the parties time to consider possible modifications to proposed conditions and to give the board members time to consider issues raised by a virtual flood of public comments. And let me say for any of the members of the public who are listening, we thank you very much for those comments. They're very helpful to us to know what such a wide cross-section of the community thinks, what their concerns are. And we're especially grateful that you've taken the time to write them down and send them to us. Contrary to what a number of people believe, the written comments are much more impactful to us, in my opinion, than oral testimony. Having the written comments in front of us gives us a chance to really think about them much more so than when we just hear them and have to make a decision a few minutes later. So again, thanks to all the members of the public who have taken the time to do that. So early last week, I requested Mr. Dales for some additional information about the social organization. He's responded with the articles of incorporation, and there was one other document, I believe.
MOU.
Memorandum of agreement. So those will be, we thank Mr. Dales for that. Those will be admitted into the record, along with the application, the staff report with exhibits, the addendum to the staff report with exhibits, and the supplemental statement regarding, well, that's the addendum to the staff report. So we're at the point where we, the record is closed, except to the extent that we will, the board members may have questions, and we've got Mr. Dales and some of his clients here, as well as staff to respond to any questions that you all may have about this case.
And,
This is
and
also a novel case in that it involves a single application with two proposed uses.
so Bob, I believe that Kim has some introductory comments based on, everything that we've submitted, et cetera. If you
All right.
entertain
All right, Kim.
those.
Kim, what do we need to know?
I guess I just wanted to, I did send the board, in addition to all the other stuff you mentioned, we did some research on the tent permits and all the permits that have been associated with the social organization from 2009 to 2022. And it averages about.
We'll admit that to the record. That's
okay.
Pretty self-explanatory. For both you and Mr. Dales, I wanted to limit any new evidence to responses to questions from the board. Otherwise, this will go on indefinitely.
Then I will wait for questions.
Yeah, great. Okay. So who would like to go first? Dr. Chen, do you have more questions this evening?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Kim, I did have a question from the last meeting with regard to the traffic analysis. Did you get any comments from any staff with regard to my question?
So I did ask Kwaku, and I did send that addendum to the trip generation today that he updated. I don't know if you received that.
So
there's
for
really
the addendum.
Yeah,
Let me
Dr.
just
Chen, there was
clarify,
an addendum that went
Kim,
out to us today that showed basically looking at it with new eyes and in different ways. They didn't change their opinion that there's no need for a traffic analysis. It doesn't really change their assessment of trip generation.
Is it all right if Ms. Burke walks through what was sent in?
Sure. So we asked Kwaku to update his analysis, and from the uses, I guess, in the trip generation catalog, there's really nothing for events. There's different categories. You don't do from what he told me, you don't do trip generation by the number of people that could potentially be at an event. It's all about the use category. There is nothing just labeled events. It goes from like arena to, barbershop. There's not really something that's just events, because it's such a broad, I guess, a broad term. So what he did, what he felt was the different types of inns, and that's what he came up with. And he gave the different types of hotels that I guess some have meeting rooms associated with them, and that was where he generated. And I guess he updated the numbers based on the new trip generation category, but he still felt that, as Chairman Gallagher said, that there was no need for a traffic study. But it was really hard for him to get me a number on an event. It's not really something that they do a traffic study on, from what he has told me, or a traffic analysis.
So my question last time went to the use, which was an office building as opposed to a social club. And what I would ask for an explanation is now, is he considering the social club a hotel? Is he combining the inn now with the social club? I just wasn't clear what was going on.
It seems like because the social organization has offices associated with it, as it did before. So I think that that's where he was going with his number. I don't think he was combining it, but I think he was only looking at the social organization as an office, and then the hotel separately.
So the analysis remains that the use is an office building for the social club.
For the traffic and not the parking, which he doesn't have anything to do with.
I understand. So again, I'm not sure what this addendum, then the purpose of it is.
The purpose was, we were trying to get a better idea of how, if there was an event held at this social organization, which is, if I misunderstood you, I thought that's what you were looking for as far as how that would impact traffic. And what he was, from how I understood him telling me, was that there's just not that use to put into his trip generation, that this was the best fit that he could find for that specific instance, if that makes sense.
So what he gave us in the memo we got today was that he's combined the two uses, and he's given us 3 charts here that he's given us trip generations for an all suites hotel, a business hotel, and hotel. And I think that was based on his looking at and this is all based on how the ITE manual classifies uses, which does not always fit how people actually use their property. So you're constrained by trying to find a category within that manual that most closely approximates what's being proposed. And that's the manual that he uses to do all of the studies. So he tells us in his memo from May 15th that a standard hotel includes sleeping accommodations, restaurants, meeting and banquet rooms, or convention facilities. So I think that I'm gathering that what he is looking at with this is that because a hotel use also includes meeting and banquet facilities, that the numbers that he's giving us under proposed, I mean, he's given us 3 different categories of hotel uses, and the standard hotel does include the meeting and convention facilities. I'm not really So he's saying that regardless of whether you classify it as an all suites hotel, a business hotel, or a standard hotel, that, you know, that here are all the trip generation rates for total AM, PM, and PM peak hours. And he's determined based on, and then he has to, his second chart is the net trip generation of the proposed use. So he, you know, he's subtracted out what he perceives was the trip generation of the prior use of the property by the alumni, U.S. Naval Academy Alumni Association. And he has determined that, you know, that it does not, that it does not, the trip generation rates are he's actually showing them being in the negative. Regardless of how we feel, you know, the public's perception of this or our perception of this, he's doing this all by formulas, and this is what we have.
Understood. Thank you. I just needed to understand what the information was.
Yeah, it's all done very formula. It's very much of a formula, formulated business, and he is our city expert on traffic impact.
Yep, I understand. Mr. Chairman, am I allowed to ask questions about information that was provided by Mr. Dales today, or would you prefer we don't? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Please go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Dales, the MOU, I see that the length of the relationship is 3 years. What happens after that?
I'll let the applicants speak to that MOU. My understanding is that that would be renewed and the term would go again unless there was a need for a new social organization tenant. Either Vadim or Corey, feel free to.
Hi, Dr. Chen, Vadim here. Just as Phil mentioned, the idea is to have a time limit. We had to put, I mean, in general, we have to put some sort of time limit on it, but the idea is definitely to renew the partnership.
It just appears short to me, considering this arrangement, this complex arrangement that we're presented with is complicated. So I was surprised to see only 3 years.
Well, one of the reasons we just have an MOU and not a lease or a longer term is that it sort of depends on, you know, the special exception being approved, and then we can develop those more formal relationships. I'd also, Mr. Chair, I understand the need for brevity tonight, and we'll only, you know, address questions that I'm asked. Just as a reminder, there were several questions asked last time, and we provided additional information. But for some of the questions the board asked last time or statements that were raised, I had a few notes on clarifications and comments on the supplemental info we provided. And I think if there's an opportunity for me to speak to those very briefly, I would, just because the public has sent in written comments since the last hearing. I think some of those are a result of a misleading newspaper article or having observed the hearing. So it will matter for what happens after this hearing, you know, that I'm able to answer some of those questions that the board asked and explain any of the supplemental information.
Why don't we do that after the board members have had a chance to ask you the questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Zazali, would you like to go next?
You're on mute, Christian.
I'm gonna hold off, Bob, until I hear the other. I'm
Yep.
gonna enjoy the benefit of some of the other questions before.
All right. Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Chairman, I take, I know that a lot of what Mr. Dale submitted goes to what we asked about, specifically about parking arrangements. And I know he submitted those things, so I'll hold my questions back until my only comment and possible question is, and maybe this is for Kim or Jackie, is I get where Dr. Dua has had difficulty trying to take the combined uses of this property and find them in the ITE manual. I look too, and yeah, it's difficult under the categories provided, but you know, and certainly you can come to the conclusion that it wasn't going to generate enough traffic to call for a full traffic impact analysis. But the comments that we've received from the public largely have had to do with the the adequacy of parking in the face of not only the uses but during the construction phase, in addition to all the construction and traffic that goes on around that. And I just don't know if that what was submitted by Dr. Dua really satisfies my curiosity in that respect.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hector?
The only concern I have is the parking issue. That's the only thing I'm concerned about.
All right. All right, so I got a few questions, Mr. Dales. So we have the articles of incorporation, and the officer identified there is Brianna Boyce. And can you tell us who she is?
Mr. A.
I can speak to that, Mr. Chairman. She's an assistant of ours. She just helped incorporate the entity.
Okay.
She's not otherwise going to be part of running it.
And Vadim, you signed it also. The
Correct.
article, yeah, okay. So I may have misheard, but I thought at the last hearing, there was some mention of a number of maybe 40 members, but the articles say it's not a membership corporation.
That's a reference to the corporate term membership, as in an LLC has members that are owners of the entity. This is a non-stock corporation. The members that we referred to at the last meeting are members of the social organization, not with regard to the operation of the entity or control of the entity.
And what are the membership criteria?
It's been, the offer to be a member has been extended at many of the public meetings we've been to members of the Wara Group, to city residents, to the friends and family of academy grads, to military colleagues of Vadim and Corey's history in the military. So there aren't strict requirements that people have to be interested in supporting the purpose of this organization that's specific to continuing the tradition at Ogle Hall. And I think one of the conditions I submitted late today in response to some of the concerns raised very late in public comment was to clarify what that membership means when someone becomes a member. It is not the intent of the social organization that the members would have the privilege of being able to access the property at any time outside of the events. Membership is just to support the cause and have access to book events. So would not be expected that the members will be coming to the property and generating traffic or needing parking. That would only happen during the events, which I would also add, because it's been discussed here tonight, we believe will be nearly identical or the same to the use of the property now, since we've accepted the same limitations that have governed this use in the past. And I think Ms. Burke has clarified, but would note for everyone listening that the wedding events were not being held illegally by the Alumni Association. The condition that has governed those events simply states that weddings can't be held behind 49 College. Weddings and other similar events. Weddings are permitted at Ogle Hall itself, subject to the other restrictions on being outside and having limitations on the number of outdoor events per year, being 15.
And I noticed in the articles, you said that one of the purposes is to bring the Annapolis community in to the association.
Right.
And so, as you said, anyone who expresses an interest can become a member and can hold an event there. And how will holding events there support the Naval Academy or alumni of Naval Academy, or even more generally the military?
I'll answer that generally, and then I can ask Corey or Vadim to add on to what I'll say. We went through the trouble of drafting a purpose statement for the social organization that details what its mission is, essentially. And that mission is to continue the traditions of events that have been held at Ogle Hall and to expand the community that gets to enjoy those traditions to other members of this social organization who could be citizens of the city, friends and family of academy graduates. And there are obviously limited number of events that we can hold per year, especially with regard to outdoor events. And so there will be prioritization for some of the members to have access to booking those events. And the details of how that membership will be prioritized are not fully fleshed out yet. Currently, the members, these initial members are people who are aware of the organization and purpose of the organization and wanted to support that through early membership. And Corey or Vadim, if you have anything to add to that, please feel free.
Yeah, in addition to that, I mean, the purpose of the organization also is to support the renovation, maintenance, and upkeep of the property. I mean, obviously, it's a beautiful property in a great location in downtown historic Annapolis, and we want to keep it in that condition. And that's one of the purposes of this social organization, is to ensure that we can continue to maintain the property in the condition that it deserves to be maintained in.
What activities will the social organization engage in other than events at the request of members?
So there's a fairly limited purpose in that the events generate money and are themselves achieving the purpose of having people experience and access this property. So it'll be the events to generate with the experience that the organization exists to provide, and to generate revenue that will keep the property in shape to host those events. So the renovation using those funds as well, and upkeep.
All right, so would it be fair to say that the social organization would not exist but for the efforts of FWCI to be able to offer events in connection with the inn?
The events are not in connection with the inn. That explicitly is one of the other conditions you asked us to submit. So the inn and the inn's area on the property will not be available for events. So the 49 College entirely, and
so if you don't get the special exception for the inn, you're going to go ahead with a social organization anyway.
I think that we obviously these are being offered in such tandem that it would be difficult to do one without the other at this point. They're intertwined, but we would do either independently if we had to. And the social organization would operate on the first floor of Ogle Hall and in the courtyard, and the inn and the other spaces wouldn't be permitted yet. I think.
Go ahead.
To answer your question of that, when you said, would it be fair to say that the social organization wouldn't be able to provide its purpose without FWCI's permissions to have
No,
events?
the question was, would it not exist?
Would it not exist? So I would say that the purpose of the social organization is alike to Friends of a Park or Friends of a historic, any kind of historic landmark. The ability of those organizations to support the thing that they are intended to support is dependent on a lot of things. Their ability to operate, to have a place to operate from. That's the sense in which those two things are connected.
You did give us your thoughts on valet parking conditions. You did not say, as I recall, anything about hours of operation of the valet parking.
You're correct. That could be a welcome addition to the valet program condition we offered. And I asked Vadim and Corey about that today, thinking that the valet would operate until 11 p.m. unless it was known that a guest would be arriving later than that, in which case valet service could be extended. Vadim and Corey, would you want to provide some consent or agreement to those hours if they're to be added to a condition?
That's correct. Basically limiting the check-in and valet use until 11 o'clock at night.
And so it would start around check-in time, I guess.
Yeah, through 4 o'clock.
But you'd need somebody to retrieve guest cars who were there leaving before that.
Oh, that's a good. That I was referring more to like check-in time frames, but yes, you're correct. For checkout times, we would need to have the valet available.
And one or more of the public comments asked about staff parking. They made the point that you say staff parking is on site, but certainly if there's an event, you're not going to have enough staff parking on site. How are we going to deal with that?
I think we need to separate the two uses when we answer these questions. the parking requirement for the social organization that hosts the events is tied to the number of employees, and there will be a very small number of employees for the social organization. We said 2 initially, and that's what we would stick with now. And also we're going to provide the valet service to those employees. But the 2 spaces are available on site for employees of the social organization. For the inn, the parking requirement for an inn anywhere, whether it's surface parking on site or doing it by valet, it is by the room. It doesn't take into account the number of employees. So an inn has 20 rooms, and that sets the parking requirement. We are going to be providing the valet parking for the inn to meet that parking requirement in the code, as well as some additional parking, according to the conditions we offer.
But so there's an event there and you've got a caterer and you've got 3 or 4 servers. Where are they going to park?
So what we agreed to with regard to staff for an event, which again, I would suggest is no different than the current use of the property when an event is held there, was that we would ensure that no staff or caterers of the event would be getting the street park permits that allow for them to take up more than they're allowed on the street for extended periods of time beyond the 3 hours that are allowed on the meter. And Chairman Gallagher, we would be amenable to conditions if there is a way that the board could consider an enforceable condition that we could require of the caterers to serve those events. I would be willing to impose that if it's a reasonable suggestion. We just did not realize that was a specific question to us.
Yeah, okay. That's helpful. Madeline, we have a couple of members of the public who asked to testify, do we?
Yes. They are all in the meeting now,
All right.
with the exception of one name on the attendee list that I did not see on my list at all.
All right. So who do we have here who would like to testify?
Amanda Fegley, Paige Ferguson, and Andrew Miller.
All right. And we have them admitted to the meeting, do we?
Yes.
All right. So Ms. Fegley, Ms. Ferguson, and Mr. Miller, do you affirm that subject to the penalties of perjury, that evidence you give tonight will be true to the best of your knowledge? Right, to hear an affirmative on that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And let me say before we start that if you submitted written comments, we have read them. We appreciate that. And so as far as your testimony tonight, we'd ask you to please limit it to the specific criteria, the 7 criteria for special exceptions under the code. And please try not to repeat whatever you've given us in writing. So
Mr. Gallagher, can I mention that Dave Smolsky also signed up to testify? I don't see him.
That is the name that I had in the attendee list, not on my list. Mr. Gallagher, I can promote him if you'd like.
Yeah, that's fine. So let's hear from Ms. Fegley first.
Okay. Hi, my name is Amanda Fegley, and I live at 238 Prince George Street, which is immediately adjacent to 49 College. In other words, my backyard, in addition to all of my neighbors up on Prince George Street and neighbors on College Avenue, and also Maryland Avenue and King George, we all share backyard spaces, so that my connection with the parcel that we're discussing, we'll just call it Ogle Hall 49 College, is very close to me. I have had a very intimate, let's just say, relationship with the Naval Academy Alumni Association for the last, well, I've only been there 39 years, so I'm practically a newcomer to Annapolis, but it's been a very amenable and congenial relationship. And I am just concerned that any new owners can continue to maintain the integrity of that incredibly important landmark property, and that anything that happens there, because I am right there, I can see everything in the backyard of 49 College, everything in backyard of the cottage, everything in the backyard of Ogle Hall. There are some nice plantings which buffer us, and we all try to respect each other's privacy, but I just want to be very clear that whatever activities are planned there are in compliance with the special exception standards. Category B, the special exception will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, or substantially diminish and impair property values within the neighborhood. I don't think that needs a whole lot of explanation considering our proximity. So, and I did elaborate that in written testimony. And further, obviously, the parking thing, to say that there would have very little impact is almost laughable. We all have to work that out, and I would hope that they would make strenuous efforts to keep all their stuff out of downtown as much as they can, for their guests, et cetera, if that in fact does happen. And I guess it's all about being very clear. What in fact do they hope to be doing, so that there's no misunderstanding or misinterpretation of the use of the property. I think that a lot is coming out because more questions are being asked, because it's sort of like, we're just going to maintain it. You won't even know this any difference on the outside, which is fine, appreciated, for such iconic buildings. And I will say in something different that I have not elucidated in written testimony, but back in the late 90s, my neighbor, Bill Brill, now deceased, and several other of us, hundreds of us, in fact, launched a very serious inquiry into the proposition for a special exception at 49 College. That took that building off of the residential rolls and put it into what it is currently, offices. And we went through a strenuous special exception conversation around that, so that one of the things that they had to do for certain is put in at least one apartment to keep it a residence. But again, it's sort of eroding the nature of our community, because we are that special C1 conservation residence district, and we residents really care about that. So, this isn't no, change is bad, we hate it, it's awful. That's really not what I'm trying to convey. It's, if you're going to embark on such a endeavor such as this, which sounds, clearly it's a money-making venture, why would you make the investment if you couldn't get some return on it? And they've just spoken to that. They want to create a fund to help fund this. It just has to be very thoughtfully handled, and I would hope that Planning and Zoning and Board of Appeals would absolutely put the necessary conditions. That a staff report has made some suggestions, and certainly no paving of the backyards. I mean, that's off the table. Anyway, those are my concerns as a neighbor, as a very, very close neighbor. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Ms. Ferguson.
Hello. Okay. So good evening, and thank you so much for consideration of the testimony tonight. As a native Annapolitan and a resident of 22 College Avenue, I'm across the street neighbor from Ogle Hall. I have many concerns about the future utilization of this property, such as the effect of a 20-room hotel, the undisclosed and unpublicized occupancy rate of said hotel. I still haven't heard that tonight. Obvious parking issues, as Amanda referenced, valet and staff parking, which I'm still confused about even after Mr. Dales addressed them, and venue overuse. My main concerns tonight are about the venue overuse and the volume of guests at an ongoing year-round 20-room inn. I'm not going to take much too long. I regret that you've not heard from me prior to tonight. I wasn't available. And also I thought I had heard full disclosure at the most recent Ward 1 Residents Association meeting. So when I got back from being out of town, I was completely shocked when I read the article in the Sunday Capitol following your meeting. And the total lack of transparency at the Ward 1 meeting was truly astounding. I'm speaking particularly regarding the undisclosed maximum occupancy rate and much more vehemently about the social club and venue expectations. We were told that the social club was merely a way for them to hold occasional wedding receptions, as was always done in the past. I have since learned that they already have 40 members associated and that they are assuming unlimited venue activity. Also, I understand that weddings and parties were never actually allowed to take place. I was sorry to hear this since my own wedding reception 35 years ago was at Ogle Hall. So I'm just going to get to the point since time is short. I've discussed the proposed hotel and venue with dozens of Ward 1 residents and neighbors. And this is what an acceptable compromise to Fairwind's proposal would be. And I'm sorry to say this, but we've talked and talked. The hotel is much too large to be supported in a small residential neighborhood. The number of rooms should be cut by at least half to 10 rooms maximum. Second, the permission to use as an event venue in a small residential neighborhood was never supported and therefore does not need to be withheld. There is no reason to grant an exception on a residential block at this point. The new Alumni House will provide plenty of event space, so there should be no more events at the Alumni House. And third, I will respectfully request that the vote on this issue be postponed due to lack of prior disclosure and transparency on the part of the applicant. The information shared by the applicant tonight should be made public for discussion. Please don't vote tonight. The Ward 1 Residents Association hasn't had a chance to digest this information or take a stand. They'll be meeting in 2 weeks and can make a decision then. I understand the applicant can rebut what I'm saying. So again, I would like their rebuttals to be made public for discussion. So I'm just really thank you for your consideration tonight. Please consider postponing the vote again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Mr. Miller?
Thank you very much. Andrew Miller, 110 East Street. So I think we read in the Gazette, and it's been brought up tonight that you all are considering adding some sort of like valet parking conditionality onto an approval. So we live next to the parking garage that the Governor Calvert Inn uses, and they contract out valet parking to PMC, and they use that. So I think we're in a reasonable position to provide some kind of insight into the impacts that can have. And like, quite frankly, our experience being near the valet parking has not been a good one at all, really. So oftentimes you'll see the valets drive in a hazardous manner, or at least that's how it appears to us. And I think importantly, and like why this seems to persist, is that there's a gap in enforcement in the city. So when you see hazardous driving, the options are call the police, but I think we have ethical concerns with doing something like that. They have a number of priorities that probably go way above this sort of thing, and they're probably not going to arrive in time to witness the hazardous driving itself, right? So you can't really use the police to address poor driving on the part of LAs. Now, you could, in theory, go to the Department of Transportation, but from what we can tell, they don't seem to be particularly interested in robustly enforcing the rules and regulations put on the valet parking services. So I'm not saying like this will necessarily be the case with Ogle Hall, but the fact is there is a pretty significant gap in enforcement in the city, and that should be taken into consideration when looking to valet parking as a potential solution to the broader parking issue. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Smolsky.
Yes,
Mr.
my name is
Smolsky,
David
still with me?
Smolsky. My name is David Smolsky, and I live at 16 College Avenue, just down the road from Page. And I will say that a lot of my comments regarding the size of the hotel have already been stated, but I will state again that I don't see any reason for a 20-room hotel and a social club that will be active constantly located in a small residential neighborhood. It's a major commercial enterprise that would be in an area that most people just live in. Also, regarding parking and parking enforcement, I have to reiterate, there will be parking impacts in our neighborhood from this. We have a lot of Airbnbs, we have a lot of day trippers that park here, and there is no parking enforcement from Premium. We heard last week that this group and the planning and zoning have no real control over Premium parking, and that's another department. However, you're all agents of the city. And when you make it it was the city that contracted with Premium Parking, who does little to no nighttime enforcement and absolutely no weekend enforcement over here in our area. So as agents of the city, when you make a decision or take an action, I would hope that you would consider other actions that the city has taken when you make your decision on these proposals. Finally, I do have a story about the Premium Parking. This past weekend, St. John's had graduation. Somebody knowing that claimed they didn't know, but they clearly blocked a driveway and a garage. The person called Premium Parking on Sunday said, "We can't help you right now. Please call the police." We're not supposed to call the police when there's an issue with parking. So again, this is an issue that I think is endemic in Ward or in Zone 1 and Zone 2, and Premium Parking is something the city hopefully will address. And it's also tied definitely to the number of people that will be added to our neighborhood because of a 20-room hotel and social events. And the intersection at College Avenue and College Avenue and King George Street is very dangerous. I've almost been hit. I've seen other people almost get hit. You add again a 20-room hotel on that corner and social events, you're only going to make the problem worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smolsky. All right. So Madeline, you can put these folks back in listening position, if you would. And we'll go back to Mr. Dales. Mr. Dales, is there anything you still need to say? This is the time to say it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to respond to some of the questions asked at the last hearing and also respond to what we've heard referenced multiple times here. It was a newspaper article in the Capital Gazette with multiple false statements and in general a mischaracterization of the hearing and what our proposal is. And so I'll just go through briefly the things that I felt that needed to be answered from the last hearing or corrected from that article as quickly as I can, especially because we've talked about some of them already. The article noted that the valet program was going to be in partnership with the U.S. Naval Academy Alumni Association. And what we had said at the hearing, to be very clear, is that they had offered to support us through making the available parking at their new facility and whatever overflow parking they had available to our valet. We did not represent we'd be operating a valet program together. We didn't represent that that there was any written agreement for them to participate in that, but they did make the offer and they have recommitted to the fact they want to support us, and if they can in that way, that they want to. I think we've heard people even tonight, after I corrected the comments that were made about the weddings not being permitted, say again that that the weddings should not have been happening over the years and therefore shouldn't continue now. To reiterate, and because this was in the Capital article too, weddings have been permitted at Ogle Hall. That has been legal and in accordance with their conditions. We're accepting the same exact conditions and expect nearly any change from the operation of the social organization that has existed there, namely the Alumni Association's events and ours. The conditions we've asked for with regard to weddings are the same, and they do permit weddings at Ogle Hall. So that needs to be corrected for everyone in the public listening. We've also heard from many people in the public comments, and then again tonight in testimony, that there's a perception that social organization will be constantly active. There are pretty strict limitations in the conditions that are offered. And we are not suggesting the members of the organization would be at the club every day as they are at something like, say, the Annapolitan Club. This is an organization dedicated to continuing and upkeeping Ogle Hall, and that's what the membership will do. It is not grant access to the property on a daily basis or at all. Now, the other thing that was said in the newspaper article that needs to be corrected is that we've asked for the inn in accordance with special exception provisions, but that the social organization is not permitted in the C1 district, and we've asked for you to consider it anyway. That is not true, as the board knows, but many members of the public may not, having read that article. Both uses are provided for as special exceptions. And I think it's important here, and with regard to many of the comments that we've heard tonight and some of the questions, even from members of the board, that in Maryland, the special exception and how the board needs to view the special exception requirements is provided for in case law. And specifically, the courts in Maryland have always said that the special exception is a presumed valid use in a district. So if you list inn and social organization in the C1, then those are uses that are presumed to be valid, absent any circumstance negating that presumption. So then specifically, the premier case on special exceptions, Scholl v. Pritz, which is for anyone who wants to make note, 291 Maryland 1. The court said that the appropriate standard to look at these criteria, for example, parking, is so the appropriate standard to be used in determining whether a special exception request would have an adverse effect and therefore be denied is whether there are facts or circumstances that show the particular use proposed at the particular location proposed would have any adverse effects, and this is the key, above and beyond those inherently associated with the same use, irrespective of its location in the zone. So here tonight, special exception criteria to be applied are applied in that context. It's whether the in use would have any impact worse than it would have in other locations in the C1 district in this location that we propose. I would offer to the board that this location is inherently a better location than almost any in the C1 district because it is already non-residential. The use that exists there now, the office use, as compared with the changed use, the inn, was the social organization will remain the same, is going to have a net decrease in traffic. We're going to park people with valet where they aren't required to do that now. So the impact of that building will actually be less than it is now because the events will continue as they have. And you've been experiencing those if you live in this area. And this property is not inherently worse in impacting others around it than other locations in C1. And that is the legal way in which we assess special exception criteria in Maryland. So I feel like that was important to say. And now there's just a couple of requested additional information items that I wanted to go through. The valet condition we proposed was intended to address the things we heard as important to the board at the last meeting. If there are additional criteria that would help in explaining how the valet condition would meet the parking requirement, in the context I just described, we are amenable to those, and we look forward to hearing any suggestions the board may have to the condition that we put forward. The event restriction within the inn area is another condition you asked us for, and we very clearly laid out a prohibition against having events at the inn or in the areas of the property dedicated to the inn. So I'm sorry, by the inn or in those areas. And then I'd also note that this is a public hearing. So this is tonight where the public hears our answers to these questions. And I say that, in response to the testimony by Ms. Ferguson. In general, I very much appreciate the comments from the members of the public that wrote in and that are here tonight, in particular, Ms. Fagley, Mr. Miller, Mr. Smolsky. I think you raised good points. And I just would say that we want to be good neighbors and we would be very interested in cooperating with you in how the property is operated, and would have been happy to discuss these types of conditions at any of the WAR meetings we had, or in the meetings we offered in addition, directly and then through WAR to the full membership, to have meetings above and beyond the 2 full WAR meetings we had, the downtown partnership meeting we had, and the meetings with the board that we had. So we've really gone out of our way, more than anyone's required, to make people aware of this, to have these discussions. And it's a shame that they're being raised so late, but this is now the place to have those discussions. And at this meeting tonight, rather than in future meetings or a discussion about these answers again. This is why we have public hearings. Now, I will say I take some offense to the comments that Ms. Ferguson has made tonight, because she's not raised issues with our application alone. She has suggested that part of the problem with our application is a lack of transparency. Now, in light of all the public outreach that we made and the full disclosure that we gave for what we plan to do and the nature of what we're proposing, I find that offensive. And I would say that those accusations that we didn't fully represent the project are wholly unwarranted. And we went out of our way to have these discussions, and we never heard from Ms. Ferguson in asking us to talk with her about her concerns, even after the last meeting, after the article. And a lot of the concerns seem to be based on falsehoods that were in the article. So, again, we've been as open as we can be to inviting comments and questions. And we would still like to do that in the relationship we have with our neighbors. I think Ms. Fagley had mentioned that she's had a strong relationship with the Alumni Association. And I think, now that there is change and that they've sold the property, the group that you have with you tonight in Fairwinds is closely related and wants to maintain a close relationship to the Alumni Association, and very much wants a strong relationship with its immediate neighbors. And I think you'll find that they're going to be very amenable to any concerns you have with the operation once it's in place. And I also finally add, the conditions we put forward and that staff has put forward are very specific. And those are the ways in which you have assurances about how a property is operated. Now, I understand enforcement is something beyond those conditions. To enforce those conditions is not something that we can help with. If there's ever a problem with any of the conditions the staff has proposed or that we've put forward, or the board may offer tonight, I can't speak to how we could improve enforcement other than doing our best to comply with those. But the enforcement problem, whether it's about these conditions or about parking throughout Ward 1 or the C1 district, is a problem that is equally applicable to any property. And so that alone, that basis for finding a problem with the proposed use, whether it's the valet parking or traffic, or just the activity associated with the site, if it's about enforcement, that's not that is not something that's taken into account for a special exception, unless the enforcement problem is inherent to the location we're proposing in the C1 district, as opposed to other locations. So I think that's all I wanted to speak to. If the board has questions about other information we've provided, then we'll be here to answer those questions. And either I, Vadim, or Corey will do our best to make everything clear that we've proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Dales. All right, let me ask my colleagues, are we ready to deliberate?
Mr. Chairman, just a question, because I held off my question previously to Mr. Dales. Mr. Dales, you sent to Kim Burke on our staff to propose conditions regarding your parking proposal, valet services. I would refer to an email you sent her on Friday, May 5th. So that's in the record, and those would be the conditions that you propose and will abide by.
Yes, Mr. Walsh, and any other additions to those that you would propose, we will consider and consent to tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of staff, we would just like to clarify that we're requiring a parking management agreement. It's in the conditions of approval, and whatever they propose in terms of parking management and the valet parking conditions that they have proposed would have to be evaluated by the department and by the Office of Law for compliance with the code. So, for example, in order to operate a valet parking service in the city of Annapolis, you're required to have a license from the Department of Transportation. So, and there are other things of that ilk that we would be looking at with the parking management plan. And we're not really prepared to say that at this point that that all of the conditions that Mr. Dales proposed in his emails regarding valet parking have been vetted for compliance with underlying code requirements, but we would do that as part of, if the project were approved, that would all be evaluated as part of his parking management plan. That is a requirement of approval.
Thank you.
So I mean, one of the conditions, Jackie, you have in the staff report is exactly that it will be subject to the approval of the department and the Office of Law, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Walsh and Ms. Roush, the intent with our condition was to suggest that the valet program that we are identifying in our condition would be evaluated and need to be approved by planning and zoning.
Right, and it's probably much of what he has in the emails that he sent. I think he sent one again today, is probably acceptable, but we haven't evaluated it, and we haven't, conferred with the Department of Transportation, who issue the permits for valet parking services in the city, to make sure that what they're proposing is within the bounds of what they would find acceptable. There are other steps that would have to occur with this whole parking management process.
Okay,
That's all
thank
we're
you,
saying.
I believe I understand.
Any other members of the board have anything they need to clarify before we begin deliberations?
Mr. Chairman, I did ask a question last time as to the occupancy, and I was not given an answer. If somebody could please provide the answer, I'd be grateful.
I apologize, Dr. Chen. Mr. Chonsky can provide you a detailed accounting of that.
Yes, and in discussions with our architect who is here, Bill Williams, we are looking at a total of 35 beds. We'll have 4 that have single beds. But even beyond that, looking at your average guest per stay in a hotel room, on average, you're looking at about 2.1 guests. The average occupancy in the historic area of Annapolis across the year is about 72%. When you take that into account, you're looking at about a 30 guests in the historic inn at any given time. Obviously, that's going to vary. Like, you have off season where you may drop down to occupancy as low as 55%, or it may be.
I'm sorry, I'm only interested in the total occupancy, not beds, not averages. Please just give me a number. Total potential occupancy.
So
Please.
In that instance, every time you have a bed, you would have about 2 people presumed to that bed. So that would be double of what the number of beds would be in this instance. So 70.
So 70.
If we had 2 people in each bed, correct.
I think, Dr. Chen, although your question is about total hypothetical occupancy, the reason that Mr. Chonsky prepared the information to answer your question the way he did was that it predictably, even in peak season when the hotel is as full as you would expect it to be, it would roughly be 85% of 2.1 people per room. So that would be a typical, what we'd actually expect in the hotel during a peak season event or time frame. I think that's a realistic way to estimate the number of people at the hotel for your benefit to consider. So that's why we prepared it that way.
I understand. Mr. Chairman, should we hear from our counsel with regard to the case law that Mr. Dale cited?
You're muted, Bob. You were muted that whole time, Mr. Chair.
You're muted.
Sorry. We'll see what information there is available to us. Celine, did you hear the question?
I have no more question, but I do want to offer a response to Mr. Dale's comment that, this board is highly experienced. We have dozens and dozens of kind years experience on this board. We do not take our testimony from the Capitol. We take it here in the public forum, admit it as evidence or opinion. Rest assured in that regard.
Thank you.
I know that, and partly my comments are for the public who've read that article and are listening tonight, and for the reporter if she's listening tonight.
All right, we have a question from Dr. Chen, whether board counsel has any comment on the case referred to by Mr. Dales. Celine, are you familiar with the case or the concept?
I'm not familiar with the case that Mr. Dales mentioned. If you guys would like us to look into it a little bit more, then we could start doing that in the next couple of days and evaluate it for you. But off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with that case or applying it here at this point.
Yeah, that's
It would be helpful. I can have that as direct quotes that I could screen share so that it's not a question as to.
no, we don't need to do that. All right, is there anyone else on the board who has concerns they want to talk about before we deliberate? Mr. Hector?
No.
We all good? Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we bifurcate the deliberations into the two uses, talk about them one at a time, starting with the inn. And as usual, I'll ask someone else to start, but I just wanted to introduce the subject. I went back and looked at the code that governs what we're doing here, section 212610, because I think it really sets up the discussion. As Mr. Dale said, in general, special exception uses may be compatible with the purposes of the zoning district in which they are to be located. But they may have they may result in adverse impacts on the immediate neighborhood. So you can have a compatible use for the district that has adverse impacts on the immediate neighborhoods. Quoting the statute again. The process for review of special exception applications is designed to address such adverse impacts and minimizing where possible. And I think the implication of that is if they can't be adequately minimized or mitigated, then we deny the special exception. So I'll have some concerns, but I like to hold them till after I've heard you all. It won't surprise anyone that they focus on criteria A, B, and E, which I think is where all these questions are. So who would like to go first?
She can do almost anything. Her mother was.
I need a volunteer.
I'm just reviewing that. I'm trying to gather the staff report and among the multiple things we have here.
Well, I suppose I can start, Mr. Chairman.
Bob, can I just, before you, Dr. Chen, which one are we taking first, Bob?
The in use.
In use or event?
The first one is the inn.
Okay, just want to be clear on that. Okay.
Dr. Chen, were you going to start?
Yes, well, I am obviously, since I kept asking about it, concerned about the size of the inn, which is why I wanted it clarification on the actual potential occupancy, which seems to be the number 70, which seems high. And the discussion about the averages and so on. But I feel like in this situation, it's just good to know the worst case scenario potentially. I understand that the inn is not going to have any events and that is a requirement. So that is a good thing. I am concerned about the relationship of the inn with the social organization, which will have the events. And I am cognizant that the two are linked functionally, potentially as a business. And so that's why I asked the question about the MOU being limited to 3 years, because it seems to me that a lot of time has been spent in this public hearing assuring this board that the social club has links to the Naval Academy. I think the implication there is that that is a very respected organization, and credibility comes with that. And if the MOU is limited to 3 years, then what organization will come in after that? I also see that there's a right to terminate by either party. So that raises a concern for me. The valet parking is a concern for me. I know that street, it's very narrow. If I don't see any hours of the valet parking provided to us, I know you asked about it, Mr. Chairman. It seems that the applicant hadn't considered checkout as well as check-in times. So there are some gaps there. I'm also concerned about how the on-site parking will be used for the inn, should there be events, because also the two seem to be somewhat linked, the inn and the social organization. The 3 permitted parking spaces, I worry that that's not sufficient to cover what potentially could be the amount of staff that's needed in particular situations. Those are my initial thoughts.
Mr. Walsh, have you found what you need?
I did, Mr. Chairman. I've gotten through while listening to Dr. Chen also and reading at the same time. As it relates to the end uses, it really is a matter of, to me, it's the parking issue. And if you're going to have 22 rooms, a number of people, providing a comprehensive and as close to enforceable plan as possible, I think we can put it down on paper. And I think they've tried with some of their, with what Mr. Dales has proposed in his May 5th and his comments for adequate off-site parking. And that alleviates my concern. I echo, I hear what the people in close proximity who live nearby have to say about enforcement. Enforcement is inadequate, and it's been inadequate, throughout the city. You can talk to any neighborhood from Eastport out to Wardour, and they'll tell you that. And that concerns me. But at the same time, we're not an enforcement body. We are here to apply the law to the code to the circumstances presented to us in the application. So I have a reasonable amount of comfort in what has been proposed by the applicants, and a degree of confidence that the Planning Zoning Department and the Office of Law will follow the sentiment we've expressed here about making sure that any parking is going to be as not disruptive to the local residents near and around Ogle Hall and 49 College Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Hector?
I agree with Mr. Walsh, and the parking is going to be a problem after listening to the young lady that was testifying against it. So that parking is going to be a major problem.
Yeah, it is indeed. Mr. Zazali?
So I divert to the question of the inn as an approved special exception use. So if it was a 4-room inn, would we still be raising the concerns about parking? And I don't know that the answer is that, but I do know that this board has heard special exception applications to time immemorial where the subject of parking enforcement takes up a lot of our time. And in each case, we've landed on the same foundational response that parking enforcement is not the purview of this board. We consider the application's attempt in writing to mitigate, not make worse, as a standard that we've adopted over the years. And then we've also relied very hard, we've said that the free market is where these matters are sorted out, right? If it becomes impossible to park and stay at Ogle Hall as an inn, does it cease to exist as an entity, right? This is standard statisticianal response, right? There's 5 times during the year where this as an inn is a problem for the neighborhood. It's homecoming, it's boat show, it's these are well-established events that send our entire city into a parking aneurysm, and nothing that Ogle Hall does or doesn't do changes that outcome, right? So I personally, 21 or 22, 20 rooms in as a percentage of rooms in the city of Annapolis doesn't even move the needle. I don't know how many licensed inns, short-term rentals, hotels, Airbnbs are in the city of Annapolis, but it's in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. And 20 does not change that dynamic, in my opinion.
Okay. I am concerned about parking as well. I think that the board probably couldn't be faulted if we approved or denied the application as far as the inn goes. Question is whether we think we can come up with a set of conditions that will minimize the adverse impacts on the neighborhood. And what was originally suggested, I think, doesn't get us there. We have talked about some things that I think could make a difference if we decide to go ahead and grant the special exception. As far as valet parking goes, I would want the condition to give the city a couple of minimum conditions that they have to include in the parking arrangement. One would be the hours of operation. I think 11 o'clock probably is not a bad time to require them to keep that open. I don't think we have to worry too much about the early part of the day, because if guests want their cars, the hotel is going to find a way to get them. I think they've got to prove to, and they've already offered to do this, to prove to the city that they've got a written agreement that there are enough places available for them to park the valet parked cars that are not taking up street spaces. That's essential. And finally, I feel pretty strongly, and they've taken a step in our direction. We can't make people use the valet parking, but we can give them strong incentives to do that. They've offered a discount for customers who use the valet parking. My proposal would be that they have to include valet parking in the rate, and the customers are going to feel like they're losing something they paid for if they don't use it. As for enforcement, we all know it's a problem. We all know there's very limited tools that we have to address that. I came up with an idea that I would suggest as another condition. And the idea is basically that the applicants have to send a notice to everyone they had to notify in connection with this application. In the same way they would do that for the application. That would send to all those people notice of the conditions that apply to the application and the name and phone number of the appropriate city officials to call if they believe there's a violation that requires enforcement attention. What that'll ultimately get them, I don't know. It might generate enough phone calls that someone will do something, but it's the only thing I can think of that we can do to try to help with the enforcement situation. I also think Mr. Dale's draft condition for the special parking permits is fine. I'd like it to be clear. They talk about no more than 3 spaces in terms of the inn, and then also in terms of the social event. I think that ought to be, they ought to be combined, that we're not talking about 6 spaces, we're talking about 3 spaces in total. I think that, so if I was going to vote in favor of the special exception for the inn use, I would ask that we include those additional conditions. And so that would bring us, go ahead, Christian.
I was gonna ask, just, was it ever considered a lesser room amount for a period of a probationary period and then amending the special exception at a later date?
We never discussed that, no.
Yeah. Is it within our power to do so?
We could, I mean, I think we can impose any condition that we think is necessary. We could reduce the number of rooms, or we could reduce them in some conditional way. Mr. Dales will get to you eventually.
I'm not suggesting that it's as a novel approach. It would address this nebulous question is of what number is the right number of rooms, and if they were able to satisfy and operate reasonably satisfactory, we would have no basis for denying an amendment to the special exception at a later time. But maybe 20 is the right number, right? I don't know. I'm open to suggestions in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know either. So that would bring us to a discussion of the social organization. Again, I come back to the discussion I mentioned earlier. The process of this process is designed to address the adverse impacts and minimize them if possible, and if not, we can't grant it. Let me just say before I hear from you that I've got special concerns about the use exception beyond the parking and the noise. And the use exception, if we grant it, would have to address the noise adequately. And I think staff's effort there has been a good one. But the code doesn't define a social organization. It does define in that's clear. We know what that is. The code does say you can have an inn, but no social events. You can have a social organization that's not an inn, doesn't have rooms. I seriously doubt that the council, when it passed those rules, intended that an applicant could have events in connection with an inn by just inventing a social organization for the purpose of having social events in connection with the nice new 20-room inn. The inn would otherwise, if without the social exemption organization use, the inn can't have the events. And I think it's pretty clear from what we heard today that this social organization is one that's invented purely for the purpose of allowing to have events on this combined use property. In what I think appears to be an opposition to the intention of the council that 20-room inns can't have social events. So that gives me a problem. And because those, I think it's trying to drive a truck through a loophole. And I think the two uses are inconsistent in that sense, that the council didn't intend social events at inns. And it came to my attention that the board, even before your time, Christian, back in the many years ago, faced a similar situation where Moe's Southwest Grill wanted a special exception for a standard restaurant and a delicatessen at the same location.
I was here for that, Bob.
Were you? Well, then you remember that the standard restaurant can have a large number of seats but limited takeout, and the delicatessen has a limited number of seats but unlimited takeout.
They're not
It
both.
was a similar end run, and what I believe you all decided was they could have one but not the other.
That's correct.
And I think that's where I'm leaning on this. I'm ready to be convinced otherwise by you guys, as always. So let me hear from what you let me hear what you guys think. To go first. Do you want to?
I take everything you say soberly and agree with all of it. I don't know that how this board is charged with interpreting the code that says inns could be inns but not hold events, and social clubs can have events but they can't operate as a boarding house inn, right? That's what it says. And how do we have an administrative or a physical firewall between these two proposed uses? We don't, right? It's a paper firewall, if you will.
Right.
And I think a not very good paper firewall to begin with, Mr. Chairman, per my prior comments regarding the MOU. I think they're trying to create this very complicated situation where there aren't appropriate controls, if you would even believe that it could be run in a way that satisfies the law.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think at the very outset, that was my concern, is that it appeared to me that you're trying to get two bites of the apple, to use an analogy, and it's, an inn is an inn, and social organization is social organization, and I just don't know how the code foresaw that you could somehow inveigle both of them together, so that you could have both an inn and a social organization that can have events right outside the inn's door. That's just my first impression, and since then, I've seen the MOU and what's been submitted, and it just seems like it's always trying to kind of that the social organization was kind of cobbled together to kind of keep that avenue open, to keep them both to make them work together.
Mr. Hector?
My sentiments exactly.
Okay. So then let me ask, I think I'm seeing that we don't have votes to approve the social organization use. Let's go back to whether, if the applicants are still interested, we would approve the in use and under what conditions. Dr. Chen?
Mr. Chairman, I'm still concerned about the valet parking. I echo your comments about having clarity around the hours, the written agreement, ensuring that takes place. I am, of course, concerned about the occupancy. And I find Christian's suggestion interesting that there be a trial period, perhaps with a certain number of rooms to see if it works.
Michael?
Bob, I like the conditions you're proposing in addition to what's there, so I'd be fine with that. As to the inn itself, I'm not sure that we're in the business of deciding what works for an inn on a probationary basis and what doesn't. I'd be hesitant to go with that. Although I suspect that if the social organization portion of this didn't go, you'd be talking about an 18-room inn now. So the parking, I think that with the chairman's suggestions, in addition to what's been proposed, with the oversight of the Planning and Zoning Department and the Office of Law overseeing the parking management plan, I'd be fine with the inn.
Mr. Hector?
I would be fine with the end too.
Christian, any last thoughts on the inn?
No, I'm prepared to make a vote.
Okay, so
Mr. Dales is trying to get your attention.
yeah, all right, we'll give Mr. Dales 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One legal point of clarification is the code does not prohibit inns from having events. What the code prohibits is inns from serving food and beverage to non-guests of the inn, which is a de facto prohibition on events. It was brought up very early in our application process, and we went through the effort of delineating the physical spaces such that guests of the inn would be in some physical parts of the site, and that the social organization would only be in parts of the area, not part of the inn. So that, just for clarification, is the actual restriction in the code and how we envisioned them coexisting. With regard to the rooms, I would just note for the board's memory that there's only 4 rooms proposed in Ogle Hall itself on the top floor, despite it being seemingly the larger building. And any kind of approval here will include the floor plans that we submitted in substantial compliance with those. So an approval of the inn would be an approval of the upper floor of Ogle Hall, 4 rooms, the carriage house, and 49. We are amenable to the conditions. We discussed types of conditions, versions of the conditions you discussed, Chairman Gallagher, and just to confirm, we would accept those.
And you may need to talk to your clients, but are you prepared to go ahead with the use only for the inn?
Yeah, I think we would move forward at this time with just the inn approval. We discussed that before the hearing. I think we would be going to the drawing board to figure out what our next steps would be, as social organization is a very important aspect of this set of applications. So we would go forward with the inn, but we might revise our plans and come back to this board and staff with something else.
Okay. All right, then. So I guess what I'm looking for is a motion to deny the social organization on the grounds that I think that the social organization is one that's not the type contemplated by the ordinance, that it's they're inconsistent uses in the same lot, although distinctly different areas of the lot, and that that we can't adequately mitigate with conditions the concerns under criteria A, B, and E, and that we would approve the in use with the enhanced conditions that I described relating to parking, special parking permits, valet parking, and notice to neighbors regarding enforcement authorities. And I think that was it. And as always,
Mr. Chairman, I think including the cost of the valet parking in the
yes,
room.
yes, right. And as always, I would draft that written decision because this is a contested case, to circulate for review by all of you before we signed off on it. But so the motion I'm suggesting is that we deny the social organization use for those 3 sets of reasons and approve the inn with enhanced conditions for parking and enforcement to be set forth in the written decision.
So moved for all the reasons
Second.
stated and the conditions you suggested. We
A
reserve the
motion
right
on
to
this-
read it in its written form before signatures go out.
Yeah, well, you'll see it in the written decision.
Yep.
So we've got a motion by, is it your motion, Christian? And
My
maybe
motion is to
second.
capture everything you said.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 So another unanimous decision. Thank you, Mr. Dales and your clients. Appreciate your candor. I mean, for a while, it looked like you might be trying to slide one by us, but you've, in response to our questions, you've been perfectly candid about what's going on here. That if the 3 years this social organization didn't work out, you find another one. And we appreciate that. And so you will have our written decision. We'll do our best to protect the neighborhood as best we can from the concerns about parking and noise and so forth. So thank you all. Our next meeting is going to be June 2nd.
No, June 6th.
June 6th. Okay.
And we need to verify that we have a quorum tonight for that.
I know we don't have Michael.
I will not be present, no.
We do
Michael
have,
has chosen to go to Africa instead of coming to Board of Appeals meeting.
we do have Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Dales. Thanks to your clients.
I intend to be present, Bob.
Okay, great.
So does that mean we have a quorum?
Yeah, we will. Mr. Hector, can you make it?
Yes, I'll be there.
That's terrific. So we'll only be missing Michael.
Okay.
That's great. And I know one of these days we're going to be back to one meeting a month. So thanks, Jackie and your staff. Thank you,
Thank you,
Celine.
guys. Yeah.
It looks like we won't need that advice after all.
And thank you especially to Kim Burke, who,
Yeah.
who's only been with us a short time. Kim has actually already been promoted and is doing a fabulous job. You can't imagine how terrific it is to work with her.
Yep, she's been very responsive to us.
This is a tricky one, Kim. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, truly grateful, Kim.
Thanks. This was a tough first one.
That's enough
Yeah.
for Kim Burke. I mean,
And
I've known her for 20 years. This is enough.
don't forget Kim
On that
Consoli,
case,
who
Kim,
Kim
we're
Consoli
even more
remembers
sympathetic.
all the things we didn't say.
Yes.
Any
All
more
right,
business
thank
before the
you
board,
all.
Bob?
Is there a motion?
I
Motion
move
to-
that we adjourn.
Turn.
Aye.
We have second, thirds, and fourths.